But essentially, when I was a kid, I was wondering kind of what's the meaning of life? Like, why are we here? What's it all about? And I came to the conclusion that what really matters is trying to understand the right questions to ask. And the more that we can increase the scope and scale of human consciousness, the better we are able to ask these questions. And so I think that there's certain things that are necessary to ensure that the future is good. The thing that really matters is making a self-sustaining civilization on Mars as fast as possible. It would be an incredible adventure. I think it would be the most inspiring thing that I could possibly imagine. And life needs to be more than just solving problems every day. You need to wake up and be excited about the future and be inspired and want to live. Like, there have to be reasons that you get up in the morning and you want to live. Like, why do you want to live? What's the point? What inspires you? What do you love about the future? And if we're not out there, if the future does not include being out there among the stars and being a multi-planet species, I find that it's incredibly depressing if that's not the future that we're going to have. This is really about minimizing existential risk and having a tremendous sense of adventure. Now is the time to take risk. As you get older, your obligations increase. And once you have a family, you start taking risk not just for yourself, but for your family as well. It gets much harder to do things that might not work out. So now is the time to do that before you have those obligations. So I would encourage you to take risks now. Do something bold. Can you tell the difference between those two things?
Right.
You know? So you need to be sort of very rigorous in your self-analysis. I think certainly extremely tenacious, and then just work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in, 80 to 100-hour weeks every week. And then
a lot of work.
All those things improve the odds of success.
Okay.
I mean, if other people are putting in 40-hour work weeks and you're putting in 100-hour work weeks, then even if you're doing the same thing, you know that in 1 year you will achieve what they achieve. You will achieve in 4 months what it takes them a year to achieve. And then I think it's also important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. So the normal way that we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We're doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it's like what other people are doing.
Me Too type ideas.
Yeah,
Slight
iterations
yeah.
on a theme, and it's kind of mentally easier to reason by analogy rather than from first principles. But by first principles is kind of a physics way of looking at the world, and what that really means is you kind of boil things down to the most fundamental truths, and say, okay, what are we sure is true, or as sure as possible is true, and then reason up from there. That takes a lot more mental energy.
Give me an example of that. Like, what's one thing that you've done that on that you feel has worked for you?
Sure. So somebody could say, in fact people do, that battery packs are really expensive and that's just the way they'll always be, because that's the way they've been in the past. You're like, well, no, that's pretty dumb, because if you applied that reasoning to anything new, then you wouldn't be able to ever get to that new thing.
Right.
It's like you can't say, horses, nobody wants a car because horses are great and we're used to them and they can eat grass and there's lots of grass all over the place, and there's there's no gasoline that people can buy, so people are never going to get cars.
Right.
People did say that. And for batteries, they would say, it's going to cost, historically it's cost $600 per kilowatt hour, and so it's not going to be much better than that in the future. And you say, no, okay, well, what are the batteries made of? So first principles would be to say, okay, what are the material constituents of the batteries? what is the spot market value of the material constituents? So you can say, okay, it's got cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, and some polymers for separation, and a steel can. So break that down on a material basis and say, okay, what if we bought that on the London Metal Exchange, what would each of those things cost? Like, oh, geez, it's like $80 per kilowatt hour. So clearly, you just need to think of clever ways to take those materials and combine them into the shape of a battery cell, and you can have batteries that are much, much cheaper than anyone realizes.
How do you think about making a decision when everyone tells you this is a crazy idea? Or where do you get the internal strength to do that?
Well, first of all, I'd say I actually think I feel fear quite strongly. So it's not as though I just have the absence of fear. I feel it quite strongly. But there are just times when something is important enough, you believe in it enough, that you do it in spite of the fear.
So speaking of important things.
Like people shouldn't think, people shouldn't think, well, I feel fear about this and therefore I shouldn't do it. It's normal to feel fear. Like there'd have to be something mentally wrong if you didn't feel fear.
So you just feel it and let the importance of it drive you to do it anyway?
Yeah, actually something that can be helpful is fatalism to some degree. If you just accept the probabilities, then that diminishes fear. When starting SpaceX, I thought the odds of success were less than 10%. And I just accepted that actually probably I would just lose everything. But that maybe would make some progress. If we could just move the ball forward, even if we died, maybe some other company could pick up the baton and keep moving it forward. So that would still do some good. Yeah, same with Tesla. I thought the odds of a car company succeeding were extremely low. I would definitely advise people who are starting a company to expect a long period of quite high difficulty.
Yeah.
But I mean, as long as people stay super focused on creating the absolute best product or service that really delights their end customer, if they stay focused on that, then if you get it such that your customers want you to succeed, then you probably will.
All right. You have to focus on the customer and delivering for them.
Yeah. Make sure if your customers love you, your odds of success are dramatically higher.
Yeah.
First of all, I'd say starting a business is not for everyone. So generally, starting a business, I'd say number one is have a high pain threshold. That's it. There's a friend of mine who's got a good saying, which is that starting a company is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. Okay, that's generally what happens, because when you first start a company, there's lots of optimism and things are great, and then so happiness at first is high. Then you encounter all sorts of issues, and happiness will steadily decline, and then you'll go through a whole world of hurt. One does have to be focused on the short-term and money coming in when creating a company, because otherwise the company will die. So I think that a lot of times people think like creating a company is going to be fun. I would say it's not. It's really not that fun. I mean, there are periods of fun, and there are periods of where it's just awful. And particularly if you're the CEO of the company, you actually have a distillation of all the worst problems in the company. There's no point in spending your time on things that are going right. So you only spend your time on things that are going wrong. And there are things that are going wrong that other people can't take care of. So you have like the worst. You have a filter for the crappiest problem in the company, the most pernicious and painful problem. So I wouldn't say I think you have to feel quite compelled to do it, and have a fairly high pain threshold. And there's a friend of mine who says like starting a company is like staring into the abyss and eating glass. And there's some truth to that. The staring into the abyss part is that you're going to be constantly facing the extermination of the company, because most startups fail. It's like 90%, arguably 99% of startups fail. So that's the staring into the abyss part. You're constantly saying, okay, if I don't get this right, the company will die.
which can be quite stressful. And then the eating glass part is you've got to do the problems. You got to work on the problems that the company needs you to work on, not the problems you want to work on. And so that's you end up working on problems that you'd really wish you weren't working on. And so that's the eating glass part. And that goes on for a long time.
So how do you keep your focus on the big picture when you're constantly faced with, we could be out of business in a month?
Well, it's just a very small percentage of mental energy is on the big picture. Like you know where you're generally heading for, and the actual path is going to be some sort of zigzaggy thing in that direction. And try not to deviate too far from the path that you want to be on, but you're going to have to do that to some degree. But I don't want to diminish the. I mean, I think the profit motive is a good one if the rules of an industry are properly set up. So there's nothing fundamentally wrong with profit. In fact, profit just means that people are paying you more for whatever you're doing than you're spending to create it. That's a good thing. and if that's not the case, then you'll be out of business, and rightfully so. Because you're not adding enough value.
You have the same fun from innovation as from business, running a business?
Well, I mean,
or would
I guess,
you rather to be just an innovator, engineer, instead of a business owner or runner?
I mean, I'd love to just do innovation and just do engineering. But you raise a good point, because a lot of life in general, in any job, there's like you have to do your chores. Mm-hmm. There's
because nobody else can do that for you, right?
Well, I think to be successful at almost anything, you have to do the tough stuff and as well as the enjoyable stuff. You have to do the boring stuff as well as the non-boring stuff. And if you don't do your chores, then bad things will happen. But if they don't do the things that they don't like to do, then the company will be in trouble. Yeah. Like you have to, you basically, like it's more fun to cook the meal than to clean the dishes. Mm-hmm. Okay, but you need to clean the dishes.
You need to do both.
Yes, you need to do both, exactly.
At Tesla, your goal has been to make a better car, and you've done that with an electric vehicle that people covet, that has quite a cult following, that's upgradable, but you also want to achieve, and your turn of phrase is very nice, or try to achieve this platonic ideal of a car, right, to reach perfection. So what does the perfect car look like?
Well, I mean, I do use that phrase with our engineering design team, that aspirationally we're in pursuit of the platonic ideal of the perfect car. Yeah. Who knows what that looks like actually, but you want to try to make every element of the car as flawless as possible. And there will always be, some degree of imperfection, but try to minimize that and create a car that is just delightful in every way. And I think if you do that, then the rest kind of takes care of itself.
Whatever you're doing is a great product or service. It has to be really great. And I go back to what I was saying earlier, where if you're a new company, I mean, unless it's like some new industry or new market that, if it's an untapped market, then you have more ability to, the standard is lower for your product or service. But if you're entering anything where there's an existing marketplace against large entrenched competitors, then your product or service needs to be much better than theirs. It can't be a little bit better, because then you put yourself in the shoes of the consumer and they say, why would you buy it as a consumer? You're always going to buy the trusted brand unless there's a big difference. So a lot of times, entrepreneur will come up with something which is only slightly better. And it can't just be slightly better. It's got to be a lot better. Number 3, I'd say, is constantly seek criticism. A well thought out critique of whatever you're doing is as valuable as gold. And you should seek that from everyone you can, but particularly your friends. Usually your friends know what's wrong, but they don't want to tell you because they don't want to hurt you. So lift you up, so
Yeah. So they'll say, oh, I want to encourage my friends, so I'm not going to tell him what I think is wrong with this product.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean your friends are right, but very often they are right. And you at least want to listen very carefully to what they say. And to everyone, you're looking for, basically, you should take the approach that you're wrong. That you, the entrepreneur, are wrong. Your goal is to be less wrong.
But you've also said, in terms of where you want to go, that developing a high-performance sports car is not what this is about.
Absolutely.
This is about something else, and you want to develop a sedan.
Yeah, the whole purpose behind Tesla, the reason I put so much of my time and money into helping create the business is we want to serve as a catalyst for accelerating the electric car revolution. The price of gas at the pump does not reflect the true cost of gasoline because you have a consumption of a public good. It's one of the most. It's really a common problem in economics. You have the same thing in fishing, where because there's no cost to fishing stocks, people just overfish and you have disaster that ensues. Right. And here we're not paying for the cost of the CO2 concentration in the oceans and atmospheres. We're not paying for all the ancillary effects of the wars and all the other things at the gas pump. So you effectively have a subsidy taking place at the gas pump because of that. So the only way to bridge that is with innovation, is to try to make electric cars better sooner than they would otherwise be.
I think successful entrepreneurs probably come in all sizes, shapes, and flavors. I'm not sure there's any one particular thing. For me, some of the things I've described already, I think, are very important. I think really an obsessive nature with respect to the quality of the product is very important. So being obsessive compulsive is a good thing in this context. Really liking what you do, whatever area that you get into. Given that even if you're the best, there's always a chance of failure. So I think it's important that you really like whatever you're doing. If you don't like it, life is too short. I'd say and also if you like what you're doing, you think about it even when you're not working. I mean, it's something that your mind is drawn to. And if you don't like it, you just really can't make it work, I think.
And he asked me what I was going to do after PayPal, and I thought, well, I was wondering, like, I'd like to get involved in space, but I just didn't think there was anything I could do as an individual. But I was curious as to when NASA would be sending a team to Mars, because that was always going to be the thing to do after the moon. I figured that there'd be some plan, and I'd just go to the website and I could read the schedule.
Then Mars
occurs. Like, oh yeah, it's like, okay, 2017, good, okay. But actually there wasn't anything on the website, and or at least I thought, like, can I not find it? Like, what's going on here? And is it secret? I don't know. But it turned out that NASA had done a study on what it would cost to do a manned Mars mission, and this was under Bush the First, and in his first, he asked for a 90-day study shortly after taking office, and NASA came back with a $500 billion price tag, and he said, okay, maybe not.
Billion with a B.
That's when $500 billion was serious money for the government. So then that got totally shelved, and it was like you were not allowed to talk about any kind of crewed mission to Mars at NASA. Anyway, but I thought, well, if I can do something that would galvanize public interest, and then that public interest would translate to additional appropriations for NASA and increase their budget, then maybe they could do it. So actually, what I sort of thinking I would do is send a small greenhouse to the surface of Mars with seeds and dehydrated gel, and then upon landing, hydrate the gel, grow the plants. And the public tends to respond to precedents and superlatives. So this would be the furthest that life's ever traveled, the first life on Mars. I tried to figure out how to do this with the proceeds that I had from PayPal. And I was able to figure out how to get the cost of the spacecraft down, and the communications, and the little greenhouse and everything. But the one thing I couldn't compress was the cost to launch, because there are only a few options.
and the US options were way too expensive. And so I ended up going to Russia 3 times to try to buy the biggest ICBM in the Russian nuclear fleet.
That's where I'd start, yeah.
Yeah.
Go big
that
or go
was,
home, right? Yeah.
I mean, okay. You know, there was some strange trips, that's for sure. But you know, there's like virtually, like you can buy any, it's a very capitalist society in some ways. So I actually did negotiate a deal to buy 2 of the ICBMs minus the nukes. But I came to the conclusion after that 3rd trip that it wouldn't really matter. Like I actually came to the conclusion that my initial premise was wrong, because I actually think there's a tremendous amount of will in the American population, particularly, to explore. The United States, you know, maybe more than any other country, is a distillation of the human spirit of exploration, and it's really fundamental to psyche. So, if people think there's a way, I think it would actually get a lot of support. But then it can't be just banging your head against the wall. You've got to believe that this can be done without breaking the federal budget. So that's when I said, okay, well, is there some way to affect the cost of space transport? And so I got together with a group of people over a series of Saturdays just to try to understand, is there something fundamentally super expensive about rockets, or can the cost be substantially improved? We had a bunch of those kind of brainstorming sessions, and I couldn't see any fundamental obstacle to improving the cost of rockets. So that's when I started SpaceX.
It's like, I'll just build them myself.
Yeah.
And then.
But like I said, at that point, I would say the probability of success was definitely less than 50%. I thought I would most likely not succeed, but it was worth a try. My time is mostly split. It's split between SpaceX and Tesla, and of course, I try to spend a part of every week at OpenAI. So I spend basically half a day at OpenAI most weeks, and then I have some OpenAI stuff that happens during the week. But other than that, it's really SpaceX and Tesla.
And what do you do when you're at SpaceX or Tesla? Like, what does your time look like there?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think a lot of people think I must spend a lot of time with media or on businessy things, but actually almost all my time, like 80% of it, is spent on engineering and design. So it's developing next generation product. That's 80% of it.
You probably don't remember this. A very long time ago, many, many years, you took me on a tour of SpaceX. And the most impressive thing was that you knew every detail of the rocket and every piece of engineering that went into it. And I don't think many people get that about you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think I'm kind of a business person or something, which is fine. Like, business is fine, but but really, it's, you know, it's like at SpaceX, Gwynne Shotwell is chief operating officer. She kind of manages legal, finance, sales, and kind of general business activity. And then my time is almost entirely with the engineering team, working on improving the Falcon 9 and the Dragon spacecraft, and developing the Mars colonial architecture. And then at Tesla, it's working on the Model 3 and something in the design studio, typically half a day a week, dealing with aesthetics and look and feel things. And then most of the rest of the week is just going through engineering of the car itself, as well as engineering of...
I've heard your response to the question, but these guys need to hear it. Why is Mars important? Why does Mars matter?
Sure. Well, I think it's really a fundamental decision we need to make as a civilization. What kind of future do we want? Do we want a future where we are forever confined to one planet until some eventual extinction event, however far in the future that might occur? Or do we want to become a multi-planet species and then ultimately be out there among the stars and be among many planets, many star systems? And I think the latter is a far more exciting and inspiring future than the former. And Mars is the next natural step. In fact, it's the only planet we really have a shot at establishing a self-sustaining city on. And I think once we do establish such a city, there will be a strong forcing function for the improvement of spaceflight technology that will then enable us to
establish colonies elsewhere in the solar system and ultimately extend beyond our solar system.